Hi everyone, this is Nicole Nowosad here today with Jillibean Soup on how you can create two different fun card ideas with one little stamp. Well, we're going to use two, but really we're going to use one. So the first one we're going to do is I'm using this small little medallion stamp that you can find in the Rainbow Ruse stamp set from Jillibean Soup. And I'm going to start off by measuring out some 3/4 inch increments on a piece of plain, flat, smooth white cardstock. Just using a ruler, and I'm actually just drawing some the key is really light pencil lines, and that's going to help me stamp out a grid later on. So I'm measuring them at 0.75, so 3/4 of an inch, because that is how large the stamp is. And in the center of this little medallion stamp, there is a little dot. So that's going to help me line up to the center of those lines. Now, yes, I know I just drew a whole grid on my card front, and I'm not erasing the whole thing. What I'm erasing is leaving everything but the little intersections where the stamp is going to actually stamp. So I'm erasing all my thin pencil lines, and now I'm using those as a marker for where to stamp. So I have this really nice gray ink color that I'm using, and I'm just taking that same stamp and I'm going over each of those little intersections from my grid that I drew out earlier. It's kind of a lot of work to do the grid, but I think it's really well worth it. Even though I did not completely get the markings 100%, I feel like it looks pretty lined up and I'm happy with that. So once your ink is dry and you have everything all stamped, you can go ahead and remove the rest of your pencil markings with an eraser. Now I'm going to trim mine down a little bit. I want to make a square card for this with this grid stamping. So I'm just going to trim it down so I have a square card front. And then I'm going to go ahead and just embellish it a little bit. There's a million different ways you could do this. I mean, obviously, there's really some great stamps in this stamp set that you could do over and over again. There's some larger, like Mandela doily type stamps that will look really pretty. What I'm doing is I'm actually going to stamp this sentiment hello twice. I'm going to use one for this card and one for the other. And because I haven't used the stamp before, you might have seen really quickly there in the video, I erased the actual stamp a little bit. That helps prime the stamp a little bit. When you use clear stamps, sometimes if you stamp right away, the first image might not be super clear. So you can either use a little light piece of sandpaper, or what I did is I just took an eraser and erased really quickly, and that just gets the stamp ready to go. Just cutting a background for my card. I use this really pretty purple paper from the Garden Harvest collection, and I'm just going to trim my card so it's square, and I have my stamped grid. So I like the gray on the white background, but I really wanted just to add a little bit of color so that it wasn't so stark against that purple paper. So I have a couple different colors here of distress oxides. So I'm going to start with the lighter one and just add a tiny little bit here. And I thought that that would be good, that would be enough of a color blend, but I decided to go ahead with a second purple color and just add a little bit more. And this one's really close to the color of that purple paper, so it's going to be a nicer blend to get onto my background. That way it's just not so stark. All right, so I have my stamp background, and at this point it's really just about embellishing the card. Stamping a grid is a great way to use up those stamps that we seem to forget that we have, and it's a nice way to create your own pattern paper for lack of a better term. So here I have this nice fun gray stamped background I'm going to use, and I'm going to pop that on the front of my card here. Just added a little bit of machine stitching, and I'm using foam adhesive to center that on the card. And now I'm ready to do some embellishing. So I have my stamp sentiment. I'm going to start by trimming it down here. And I have a set of pinking shears from my sewing stash that I'm going to use just to trim off the edge there, and some more foam tape just to get my sentiment on there. Now that I have the sentiment in place, it's time to embellish the rest of the card. So I've decided that I want to use some of these flowers from this pattern paper here from Garden Harvest, and I'm just going to cut off some of these smaller ones here. I think they'll look really pretty tucked in and around that stamped title. So I'm going to just take a few minutes and fussy cut a couple different flowers from this collection. I'm going to cut out some half shapes too, because those are really good to tuck in underneath some of those stamped pennants. Don't think you only need to cut out the whole shape. You can do little tiny bits like that too, and a little bit will go a long way. Even though I use purple on the background of this card, I'm choosing a lot of different colors that will go with that purple. So I have this really fun mint green flower, and I'm tucking that in around my pennant. some of the pinks, and then that yellow, and all those colors meld really nicely with the purple, and they all came from the same collection. So Jillibean is smart that way. They make sure everything's harmonious, so when you're embellishing you don't have to worry too much. I'm going to cut out this last flower here with some of the leafy details just to kind of fill in that left hand side there of my pennant shape and get this card almost to completion. And I'm going to layer it with foam tape again just to kind of give it some pop. And I'm going to keep all these extra little fussy cut flowers for my next card. Now I wanted to add a little bit of sparkle to my card, and I thought that I have a bunch of adhesive sequins here by Jillibean, and so I thought these will fill in those little medallions quite nicely. At first I thought I would do one in each of the circles, and then I quickly realized that was just a little bit too much sparkle, so I staggered them out a little bit more, kind of left a bit of a gap in between each just to rest the eye a little bit. A lot of sparkle is sometimes too much, so you just want to make sure that you have it all balanced nicely. So that card's done. So my second card is totally opposite than the first. I'm going to run the front of the card here. This is some watercolor paint that I'm using. I used an embossing buddy to make sure there's not a lot of static on my card. And now I'm stamping with that same medallion with Versamark ink. And I'm honestly just being very random about where I stamp it. I'm making sure I do some little half stamps along the edge and some stamps obviously in the middle. It's really hard to see, I'm sorry, on the video, but I promise you it's on there. So now that I have that all stamped with the Versamark, I'm just going to take some white embossing powder and cover the front of that card completely. And now you can better see where I've stamped all those little medallions. I'm going to clean up my embossing powder and get out my heat gun, and then you'll be able to see all the magic happen. So that's going to add a nice area where we can make our own pattern paper again with those stamps. And this time, because I've been a little bit more whimsical and just let the stamping be the guide, it's not so lined up, it's a little more carefree. I thought this would look pretty with some watercolors. And so I'm going to go ahead and grab some clean water here, relatively clean, some paper towel, as well as a round brush. I'm going to grab a couple different colors of Distress Oxide ink to make watercolors out of. So I'm going to add just a tiny little bit of water and ink, and then I'm just going to rub this over top of the card. And you can see that wherever I have heat embossed it, it's just going to leave that stamped image clean and pretty. So I'm just choosing to use a pink and a yellow right now, and when you mix them together you get that nice kind of pretty orange in the middle. And I'm adding in a bit of a light green color. I just wanted to kind of match that mint flower we used on that card, on the other card. And I'm really just watercoloring here where I've stamped with the images and letting the water kind of just mix the colors together. I'm not being super particular about it. I'm just kind of letting the inks go where they're going to go. And I'm going to heat set it a little bit as I work. As you do something like this and you can heat set it, you can actually go in again and add more color where you think you want to. I kind of got impatient, so I decided to blot it off, and I'm just cleaning up by using a bunch of that water. And a little bit more pink. I want to add some splatters, so I'm just adding a little bit more of just the pink color, not so much water to make those splatters, and then I'm going to let that dry. I decided to do the same thing with that green, and again I'm going to splatter that and then let that dry. I'm going to clean up my work area with a baby wipe. I don't want to wreck the back of this card with a bunch of extra ink. Okay, so I'm going to let that set, and now I'm going to blot off the extra ink with a paper towel and then make sure the whole thing's dry. And now I'm ready to embellish. So this is another great way to make your own pattern paper. So I'm going to trim this down really slightly. Whenever I make a card like this, I make the card front slightly larger than I want it to be, and then I trim it down to the regular card size. This is A2 size card, so it's 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. And that way I can adhere it down onto a card base, and it's not going to be all warpy, because there's nothing worse than a warped card. So now I'm going to go ahead and just finish off my card by clipping off another one of those stamp sentiments that I had done earlier, and put that here on the right side of my card this time. And then I'm going to finish off with a few more fussy cut flowers. Again, I have those ones I used in the first card left over, so I'm going to take advantage of those because they're already ready to go. And I'm just going to add those in around that pennant shape already. I am going to have to cut a few more little flowers, so I'm going to go ahead here and just finish off with another mint green one to get that kind of soft mint color. And then I thought, I want some more sparkle on this card too, but this time I decided to use just a little bit of glitter glue into the center of each of those medallions. I decided a few little epoxy dots would be nice to kind of finish off the little details. And here are my final cards. So here's that one with that watercolor wash background. So pretty, so easy. I love this. I think I'm going to do this again. And this would be really pretty on a background as well for a layout. I love this one here with the grid design and those little tiny adhesive sequins in the middle. Some really super fun cards. You can gotta use those stamps. We all buy them and forget we have them. And here's some really great ways that you can do them. I hope you'll give this a try, and I'll see you again on the Jillibean Soup blog. Thank you.